Ever feel like your brain is just like a million different things happening all at once?
Well, you're not wrong.
It's pretty wild in there.
Mm.
We're taking a deep dive into this neuroscience material today, and wow, it is fascinating. You've given us quite a mix of stuff, but looks like you're really zeroing in on how the nervous system is organized, especially the brain.
It's such a cool area of study, and to really wrap your head around how complex the brain is, it really helps to understand how it develops. You know your source material does a great job explaining that whole process.
Yeah, right. From just this single tube
Yeah.
to this crazy network of neurons, it's kind of mind-blowing.
It really is like origami, but on a gigantic scale. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That simple tube actually folds and transforms into three primary brain vesicles. The forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. Those are like the basic building blocks. And if you get those, then it's like you have the keys to understanding how the brain is put together.
So it's like you're starting with a really simple blueprint, and then from there, the brain just kind of explodes outwards and gets more and more complex as it goes.
Yeah, exactly. And this whole inside-out development thing, it's not just some random cool fact.
Right.
It actually helps explain why the brain is organized the way it is, even in something as complex as, well, us, the human brain. This journey, from a tube to this super complex structure, it lets different regions develop, specialized functions.
Oh, interesting.
Like, for example, the forebrain, which develops from that first tube. That's where we find regions that are all about, higher level functions. Things like language, decision-making, conscious thought,
all the stuff that makes us us.
Exactly.
It's so weird to think that even though, the adult brain seems like this tangled mess of neurons, there's an underlying order to it.
Totally. There's a method to the madness.
Yeah.
And to help us navigate this crazy landscape, we have the ventricles.
Okay.
You might not think too much about these fluid-filled spaces,
Right.
but they are so important, they're landmarks,
Yeah, it's like having a roadmap to the brain, right?
Mhm.
And I bet that's super helpful for neuroscientists and doctors.
Oh, 100%. Think of them like major intersections on a map.
Oh,
They help you figure out where you are in the brain. It's key for research, for sure, but also for, diagnosing and treating stuff like hydrocephalus, which I think your source material actually mentions.
hydrocephalus.
Yeah.
So water on the beam. That
Yeah.
sounds kind of scary.
It can be, yeah, especially in adults.
Okay.
It's basically this condition, and it's illustrated in box 7.1 if you want to check it out later, but it happens when the cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, that flows through the ventricles gets all messed up.
So the ventricles, those roadmap intersections, are also super important for the brain's plumbing system.
Exactly.
Well, right.
And when that system gets backed up, it's bad news. The extra fluid puts pressure on the brain, and in babies whose skulls are still soft and forming,
Yeah.
the pressure might just make the skull bigger.
Oh,
But
yeah.
in adults, it can really do some damage.
Yeah. That's a lot of pressure.
It is.
It just shows how important these simple-seeming structures really are,
Right.
and how connected everything in the brain is. Speaking of interconnected, our source material talks about the neocortex, the brain's thinking cap, right?
You got it.
I love that.
It's what really sets mammals apart, and it's especially prominent in humans. Our ability to use language, to reason, to think in these complex ways, it all comes from the neocortex.
So even within the neocortex, there's specialization, right? It's not just one big thing.
We're totally right. It's not
Yeah.
like one uniform sheet.
Right.
Your source mentions something called Brodmann's areas, and it's basically a map.
Okay.
And it's based on what the cells in the neocortex look like, the structure of the cells. Think about it like a city with all these different districts.
Okay.
You got your financial district, your theater district, your industrial zone.
Right.
Each one's built differently, and each one has a different purpose.
So Brodmann, he noticed that the cells looked different across the neocortex.
Yeah,
And he thought, maybe that means those areas are doing different things.
exactly. And you know what? Modern neuroscience has actually shown that he was right.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. One area might be all about processing what you see. Another one might be about controlling how you move.
Oh, interesting.
This whole modularity thing, this division of labor, it's how the brain can be so incredibly efficient, so adaptable.
Yeah, it makes sense. If every part of the brain was trying to do everything, it'd be chaos.
Total chaos.
Right.
And this specialization lets us do these really complicated things, from telling people's faces apart to writing a song.
Right.
And we do it so fast, so accurately. It's honestly incredible. It's the perfect example of how the way something's built, even at the microscopic level, tells you what it does.
It's all about the structure.
Exactly.
So we've got all these like specialized areas in the brain, but how does that actually work, you know?
Right.
Like our source material mentions this thing called the pyramidal decussation.
Okay.
And I got to be honest, that sounds kind of intimidating.
Yeah, it's definitely a mouthful.
What is that all about?
So it's a perfect example of how something that sounds like super complex can actually explain something you experience all the time.
Okay.
It's all about the point where, like, nerve fibers cross from one side of the brain to control the opposite side of the body.
Wait. So that's why the right side of my brain is controlling my left hand right now?
You got it.
No way.
It's like a neurological crossover happening right there in your brainstem.
That's so cool. Like our brains are literally wired kind of crossways. It always seems so strange to me, but that makes so much sense.
Yeah, and it really highlights this fundamental principle in neuroscience, you know?
What's
Structure informs function.
Right.
The way our nervous system is organized, even these like little quirky details, they directly affect how we move, how we interact with the world.
And so this whole understanding of where things are in the brain, this mapping that's not just like a theoretical thing, right? This actually matters in the real world.
Oh, totally. It's super important for actually diagnosing and treating like neurological problems. Think about a stroke, right? Knowing exactly which part of the brain is affected, it helps doctors like understand what problems a patient might have. Oh, right.
And then they can make a plan for them to recover.
So if someone has a stroke that affects like their speech, knowing exactly where the damage is in the brain is like super important.
Huge. It's not just about knowing what's wrong. It's about like how bad it is and what the best solution is.
Right. Makes sense.
The brain is so complex, we need a really good map to fix it.
You wouldn't want someone operating on your brain without like a really good map, right?
Exactly.
Speaking of maps, our source material talks about this really wild technique. It's called clarity.
Oh, yeah.
And it lets scientists see the brain in a whole new way.
It's a total game
But
changer.
it literally makes it transparent.
It's like turning a forest into this like totally open field you can explore. Oh, wow. Okay, so instead of just looking at these thin little slices of the brain under a microscope, scientists can just see the whole thing with clarity.
That's it.
And they can see all the connections in 3D.
You got it.
That's incredible.
And they can study it, like in crazy detail too. Trace the paths of individual neurons, figure out the circuits behind how we think, our emotions, our actions.
It's like upgrading from standard definition to ultra high def, but for brains.
Right.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think how far we've come in terms of being able to just like visualize the brain.
For sure.
But seeing the structure is one thing, right? How do scientists actually study the brain in action?
That's where functional imaging comes in.
Okay.
Things like fMRI, they let us see which parts of the brain like light up when you're doing different things.
Oh, wow.
Or thinking different things, or even feeling different emotions.
So if I were to like picture myself biting into a big slice of pizza right now while I was in an fMRI machine,
Okay.
you'd be able to see my brain light up.
We'd see activity probably in the areas that process what you see,
Right.
but also in the areas related to reward, pleasure,
Interesting.
maybe even like memories of eating pizza.
Oh, wow. So it's
Yeah.
like we can peek inside the brain's control room and see exactly which buttons are being pushed.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing.
It's a little creepy, but amazing.
It's a bit, yeah.
But it's such a powerful tool, right?
Totally. For understanding how the brain works when it's healthy, but also when things go wrong.
Yeah.
Like with Alzheimer's, depression,
Wow.
it's really changing how we understand those conditions.
So we've got these like crazy detailed maps of what the brain looks like. And we can see different areas light up when we do different stuff.
Right.
It makes you wonder, like, could we ever create a complete map of all the connections in the brain?
That is the ultimate goal of what's called the Human Connectome Project.
Okay.
It's like the Apollo mission, but for the brain.
I love it.
They want to map every single neural connection.
That's insane. Like, how many neurons are we talking?
Billions.
Billion.
And each one with thousands of connections.
That's a lot.
That's like trying to map every single star in the galaxy.
It's a huge, huge project.
Yeah.
Your source material talks about some of the challenges.
Right.
Just the amount of data they have to deal with is insane.
Yeah, I bet.
Plus all the technical hurdles.
Right.
But if they can pull it off, it'd be revolutionary. Imagine having that, like a roadmap of the brain.
Oh, man. It'd be incredible. We could do so much.
Yeah.
Think about it. We could finally understand, like, what consciousness even is, how to treat brain disorders with like pinpoint accuracy. We might even figure out what makes people creative.
It's like we'd finally know what makes us human.
Exactly. It's like the
Well,
ultimate question, right?
yeah.
And, even though the connectome still has a long way to go, each step gets us closer to figuring out how the brain works.
It's kind of amazing. When you really think about it, you start with this simple tube, and it turns into this thing that can write music, write books, even think about itself.
It really makes you appreciate how powerful biology is.
It does. And, we've been talking about all these different parts of the brain, like the ventricles, the neocortex.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how does it all work together so well? Is there like a conductor in this neural orchestra?
It's a great question. And it's one that neuroscientists are still trying to answer. And you know what? It might be that there isn't one single conductor.
Mm.
It could be that it's more about this balance of like specialization and integration.
So each area has its own thing it's good at, but they're all talking to each other all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine a city. It has all these different districts.
Okay.
Each one has its own job to do, right?
Yeah.
But they're all connected.
Right. Roads, communication lines, all that.
Yeah, like a network. And it's kind of the same in the brain, but like way more complex, you know?
So it's not just about which parts of the brain are active, but how they're all working together, like in sync.
You got it. It's like this intricate dance.
I like that.
Billions of neurons all firing in this like perfect rhythm.
Wow.
That's what lets us think and feel and do all the things we do.
That makes me think about how adaptable the brain is, too.
Right.
Like we can learn new things, we make new memories all the time. Our brains are always changing.
Yep. Neuroplasticity. It's amazing. It's our brain's superpower.
Right. This ability to just like change and adapt. We learn new stuff. We recover from injuries. We can handle anything life throws at us.
Exactly. It's incredible. This thing that is so complex, it can also change itself.
That's wild.
It really is. And as we keep studying the brain with all these new technologies and everything, we're really starting to appreciate how amazing it really is.
I feel like we've learned so much today just in this deep dive.
Yeah.
Yeah. We went from the very basics of how the brain develops to like the cutting edge of brain mapping.
Yeah.
And it's clear. There's still so much we don't know.
That's what makes it so exciting, right?
It is. It really is. Who knows what we'll discover next?
Exactly.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. It's been awesome.
Anytime. This was fun.
Until next time.